be a third this summer. I also participated as a producer in Camp Jam PowerPoint Academy 2 years ago, and I'm currently a choir teacher at Early College of Ardata in Sheridan, Nevada. So that's kind of my background. I'll reference some of that a little bit during the presentation, so just so you know. What we're going to talk about, kind of outlined on your handout, but we're going to talk a little bit about the history of composition and improv in education. It's not too boring, I promise. Talk about what teachers are saying. As a matter of fact, you know, I have 2 entire slides dedicated to Dr. Aguilar and Dr. Harris, who's sitting right here. So, kind of cool. And then I'm going to have 2 of my private students perform compositions that they worked on over the last couple of months. And then you guys have that handout, and I'm hoping to give you some really great ideas on ways you can incorporate this into private teaching as well as in classrooms. Cool. Let's get started. Cool. So, let's start back in the 1950s. Contemporary Music Project and the idea of comprehensive musicianship. This was a movement proposed by the MENC. It was meant to increase creativity in public schools, create a solid foundation in contemporary music education, and reduce the compartmentalization between music composition and music education. It's also meant to cultivate taste in students and give them discrimination of the contemporary music that was happening at the time. Also to discover the creative talent among students. Author of Contemporary Music Education, Michael Mark, explained it in much simpler terms. Comprehensive musicianship is the term used to describe the interdisciplinary study of music. Traditionally, music courses separate the various aspects of the subject. History and theory, for example, are taught as separate and unrelated courses, often by different instructors who make little attempt to relate the 2 subjects. This is even more true of applied music, in which students often do not learn the relationship between music, literature, historical and stylistic periods, and theoretical systems that underpin the literature. Well, what does that mean? Basically, teachers, when you learn theory or you learn history, it's often in 2 separate classes, and I know we experienced that here in college. We have 2 different teachers and 2 different classes, and sometimes the 2 relate, but not a whole lot. And then also when you're sitting in band class, right now, you go in, play the music, maybe your teacher reads you the notes, but for the most part, you sit and read music and then walk out the door. So we move on to the 1970s, when there was a decline in overall American education. There was a decline in quality, comprehension, participation in music education in particular. And then for the next 10 years, psychologists, politicians, teachers, and parents all looked for ways to fix the problem with music as well as education in general. Then in 1978, there was the Ann Arbor Symposium, which was a big conference to talk about the applications of psychology on music education. At this time, educators started to realize the importance of evaluation. This was actually one of the first ideas in the paper. I went and got from Boulder the actual text of it and read it. It's pretty thick, but what it was talking about is that you actually have to set goals and they have to be specific, not master the instrument. Well, what does that mean? Further into the paper, they start talking about the importance of theory, the ways that students learn effectively, the ways students process, how memory works, at least their understanding of it at the time, and it was all very, very specific to learning music. Also, in subsequent papers I mentioned, they started talking about theory. This is also one of the times they started to talk about it as really, really, really important, where it's just something, you're distracting me. Sorry. Anyway, it was important that theory was something worth teaching all students, not just higher level thinkers. 1980, this was more of an observation that there are a ton of journal articles that start talking about composition and improvisation and why it's important to not just jazz students, that it's important to everybody. And there's also a handful of articles that talk about using it as a teaching tool. So that's where a lot of my research comes from with some of those old articles, which is kind of cool. Then in 1994, we have the establishment of national standards for music education. And then in 2004, also kind of an observation, noticing that there is another abundance of literature coming about composition being important, improv being something that you can do with all kids of all ages, not just these crazy jazz people. And so that's kind of where we start now. The website, musicedmajor.net. It's kind of a cool sounding board for people who want to be music educators. And they had a Twitter feed. I don't actually know if it was Twitter. I say Twitter, but it was just a smattering of quotes. And these were just two that stuck out and were the easiest to put in a slide because note the number of exclamation points. There were also many hashtags. So one teacher said, improvising, with a billion exclamation points. Students have been cheated from the education of improvising. Composition. Why can't music ed be more like writing? Start with a small prompt, see what comes. Those were very common themes throughout many of the quotes, and everybody's saying, yeah, you're right, we need this, yeah, it's so awesome. Actually, the next slide. This is something that the website compiled. It's called infographic, and basically, the bigger the word is, the more it was mentioned in the feed. So the biggest is music in blue, which you kind of can't see very well, I don't think. But biggest is music, next is listening, and third was composition. And then with a close kind of tie to students. We were talking about kids, right? So, and then there's also improvisation is stuck in there as well. They explained kind of in the synopsis of this infographic and of the conversation that teachers tended to use improv and composition interchangeably. That composition was more like you wrote it down on paper, you organize it, and improvisation was composition in the moment. So that's kind of why you only see composition on that slide. This is a quote that I found in my research by a lady named Janine Rivera. I didn't actually figure out to say her name, I'm sorry. But it was in the 2006 Music Educators Journal. She says, improvisation is a valuable teaching tool. Rather than thinking about it as yet another thing to teach in the already too short music lesson, use improvisations to reinforce music learning. This is something that I've tried to do in my private studio since I started 5 years ago, and something that I experienced a little bit in high school and then subsequently experienced in the beginning of class at Metro. So talk about that. Beginning band class at Metro. So I was in the first time that they did this last year, and it was really cool. The first day, sit down, I'm expecting just to be, in a regular old band class, nothing different. And then Dr. Aguilar gets up and explains, well, this is what we're doing. It's basically an experiment. Let's figure out, we're going to do different things. I think they even gave a disclaimer, like, if you're looking for traditional band class, you can leave now, sort of thing. It was pretty good. I was like, sweet, and I got really excited about it. So the first day of class, we were told to break into groups, and we had to figure out a melody. She said, figure out when the Saints go marching in. So we're in these little groups, and I'm with these two other flute players, and we had to figure it out. So we're using our ears, we're trying to do it, and somebody figured it out, and so we're teaching it to the other people, and then ultimately we had to come up with kind of a cool arrangement, something to actually perform for the class. So there was a girl in our group who came up with kind of a jazzy vision for when the Saints go marching in, and she shared it with us, and we figured out how to play, kind of what she was thinking and where she was going with it, and ultimately we had a cool arrangement of it. Other groups did other more traditional things, more marchy type things. It varied, which was really cool. The next thing that we did throughout the semester, and we'll talk about this a little bit later as well, was making warm-ups interesting. It's one place where kids dread it. I know I dreaded it in middle school when I had to sit there and go, do, do, do. It was really boring. But what we did in this class was play with it. What can you do with it? So we did different things with call and response, change the rhythm, change the articulation. If it was a chorale or something, with a melody and a bass, the poor tuba plays nothing. We did this with the repertoire as well, but they played this big potato note, as my band teacher said it, and the flute system just played melody. Well, why can't that be switched? Why can't bass players, or tuba players get to play the melody once in a while? We should have really, Jesse, right? He was our goofy tuba player, and it was fun when he got to play the melody. So then we also did another activity where when we were learning scales and primary chords, we would play as a group, play the bottom parts or pick any note in the triad of the primary chord, and then people would improvise over it. So fun way to learn primary chords, fun way to sit there and make stuff up, and it all applies to what you're learning. Then we did an activity with the song The Red Balloon. And so the first thing we did is we obviously played through the song, And then we talked about, and it was in the notes, that she was inspired by a painting to write this song. So we discussed what maybe the picture looked like, what colors could she have used, and ultimately we wound up like notating in the score, like this section is orange and this section is blue. And so it kind of became visual in our heads as well. But then the next part of the unit was to take a picture that had a song attached to it, look at the picture, listen to the song, and then pull out the elements of the song that we thought corresponded to the picture. So this picture of King and the song that corresponded, there was kind of regal sounding. I'm sure you can, in your heads, envision something like that. So we related the two back and forth. Then, as our, we analyzed, now we actually make something. So we were given 3 paintings to choose from, which I'll show you here in a minute. And we were asked to write a short melody using the rhythms and keys we worked on in class, which were chosen from the middle school standards. And then the final step was narrowing down all those melodies down to one that we turned into a little performance for everybody at our concert. Next slide. These are, to the left, the pictures that we used. So Jimson Weave by George O'Keeffe, Broadway Boogie Woogie by Mondrian, and what was it? Mondrian. There we go. She knows. And then Starry Night from Van Gogh. So we wound up picking a melody that was based off Starry Night. So pretty cool. Then in my own teaching, actually because of that project that we did, I decided to take the top 3 pictures, and I did that at my summer camp this last summer. So it's Isle of Death is the picture. There's a song that goes along with it, and we listened to the song, and then we talked about, I think it's the painting in the top right that the song's actually based on. The other 2 are iterations of the same dream painting, as he put it, and we used those when the kids wrote their own melodies. We listened to it, said, why did the composer choose to make it really dark and misty, or, why is there no distinguishable melody, and those sorts of things. And then ultimately they made their own based on one of those 3 pictures. And then actually before doing the band class, when I was at Camp Jam, like I mentioned a little while ago, we did a lyrics class because kids really wanted to know how the heck do you write lyrics. I don't know, they had no idea. Well, some idea. But one of the activities we did was take these 3 pictures and say, use it as inspiration, write a little stanza, and then we actually had them sing it. So you sit down, take your lyrics, I don't care if it sounds good or not, just sing something. And ultimately did this activity also with my kids' early college of Arvada last spring. It was kind of interesting because these pictures, I Googled like swine or something like that to get them, and kids took them in very wildly different directions. Like the girl in the yellow, people took it either as like insanely positive and uplifting, like she's jumping and like flying away, and other people took it as extremely dark and took it to sad things. But it was interesting to see that difference, the way kids think and the way visualize things. Also with the guy kind of carrying the bird cage, if you look at the picture closer, the birds are actually on strings. And so people took it with kind of this puppeteer circus direction, and then other people took it more freely because they didn't notice the strings and looked at it as like a bird release type of situation. So these were really, really cool activities and great different pieces and parts. My conversation was not done. So it was a wonderful conversation about 40 minutes or so around there, talking about different things, talking about why we did the band class, talking about why things are the way we are. So I sat down and listened to it, and I pulled out probably what I thought were some of the biggest points we discussed. And the first was kind of asking why they were doing the band class I mentioned earlier, and the biggest issue they see in schools, an issue that they see in schools is teachers need to show growth. That part of the reason for this class was we don't see many teachers using composition and improv as a regular part of the ensemble, and that is a standard and a way to show growth. Part of that was actually a quote. The next thing was that, yes, okay, teachers aren't using composition and improv, so how do we fit that into a traditional rehearsal? Because you still have to have rehearsal, you still have to have a show, you still have to do all of those traditional things. So that's what this class was meant to represent. It was a model for doing that. It doesn't have to take over the ensemble. One of the quotes that she said was, putting it all together and showing it to somebody else. That's part of music. I mean, if you just sit there and make stuff up all by yourself, yeah, it's kind of cool, but the point is to share it with people. Another thing she said that was really kind of nice and something that may not be overwhelming for teachers is that it doesn't have to be every piece that's a project. Like the Red Balloon was a project piece. You can have all these traditional, rehearsals, and then you have one piece, the project. She right now, they're doing a piece where there's actually an open improv section written into the score. So she gets to do, or she's doing a theme and variation unit, and then they get to write theme and variations and get stuff into the improv section, and I bet it's going to be really cool. I'm super excited. So, it's kind of a cool thing. And then the last, well, not last one, just kidding, was this English class analogy that was kind of referenced actually in that Twitter feed, if you notice, the using a writing prompt idea, that right now, if music classes were exactly analogous to English, music classes were analogous to English classes, what am I trying to say? If we had a music class that was analogous to an English class, life would be really good. But right now, it's the situation where if English class were like music class, we would go in, we'd read Shakespeare, say, that was fun, and walk out the door. And that's not what you do. You sit there, you read Shakespeare, and you say, well, why did he do it this way? Why was it written this way? Let's write a response. What do you think? How do you feel? Let's write a sonnet, those sorts of things. I mean, we used to write sonnets my sophomore year of high school. We had to recite Romeo and Juliet and dress up, and we don't do that in music class. Why not? There's situations. Yeah, another thing one of the other things that she said was kind of a fun idea. What if we interpreted Beethoven? How cool would that be? Sit down and say, well, why? Let's come up with something different. Let's write something different, inspired by that, and that would be cool. I think so. Anyway. Then, kind of the last idea that we discussed was starting small, and that's kind of referenced in the, not letting it take over your ensemble, but and I asked her, why are things the way they are right now? They're basically the same as they were in the 1950s. We say, oh, this is awesome, oh, it's really cool, but we never do it. And some things she said, I'll just read it, that teachers are finding a model not to teach the way that they were taught. You perpetuate the teaching you were taught, again, we teach how we were taught. And I think that's a huge issue. I mean, I was lucky to have teachers who encouraged my love of composition, and a teacher who was like 23 when she started. So she was like, I'm young, I'm progressive, I can do anything. And I got a teacher who actually did composition in the classroom. And then number 2, she said we don't have models to show the different ways to think about teaching. People have to change what they think about composition and improvisation. Right now, they can't break the bubble. Improv is just for jazz, but as we already discussed, it's definitely not. And then I asked, well, what if you have a teacher right now who's teaching in a classroom and they're like, this is awesome, I want to break the molds, I want to do this. How can they? And she said, start small. And I think that's a great way to put it. Do something little. Take out your music or take out a warm-up and say, okay, we're going to play these 2 notes, you can play them any way you want, and then put it away. You build up the experiences and you do little things, one upon another, until maybe you have your kids writing a concerto. You never know. My conversation with Dr. Kurtz. So we sat down and we had a conversation as well. Right now, he works in elementary schools. There's a teacher who lets him come in and do all kinds of cool things with these kids. They work with textures, drones. They made a concerto of different textures. One that sounded like a breeze, a dusty road. I don't think he ever said what the other 2 textures were, but that's okay. So different textures, different idea sounds, but they do an activity where they take a note. So like if we did it in this room, it would start with like Keith in the blue back there. He'd play a note, and then we'd add Gigiana and then Pay, and then he'd cut out, and we'd just keep building it, and it'd be this kind of weird moving chord, and you're improvising. And then he talked about, cool, it's fun to make all this noise, it's fun to do all this stuff, but we actually have to talk about it. You can't just make noise for noise sake, as much fun as it is, but you have to talk about it. It develops your aesthetic, You talk about what worked, what didn't, how can we make it more interesting, how can we make it more musical, what could we do next time to change it. Fun quote, making a bunch of racket and then talking about the racket that you made with some pretty important questions is an important part of the process. You can make really crazy sounds, but then if you don't really address what happened, it has no application. So an interesting question that I actually never thought about, mostly because I'm not a huge wind player, like I play flute, but it's been a while, talks about what physically does it take to make these sorts of sounds. So if you make some loud, obnoxious sound, okay, physically, what did your body do to do that? And we don't really have that when we play a piano or do bagpipe or something. It's not quite the same. So it's a way to understand how your body works and how it can interact with the instrument. And you can really only do that by pushing some boundaries. Then the next thing he said is be open. Do both open and tonally based improvisation. You don't have to be in a key all the time, which was something kind of revolutionary for me too as a teacher, because I'm very used to doing kind of a jazz style improv where you have a key. It's a little more structured, and it doesn't have to be that way. If you have a key, it gives you right and wrong. And the idea is to make it an open environment. And if you have right and wrong, you can close that off. I'm leading into the idea of it has to be a comfortable atmosphere for kids. If you start creating from day one, it develops a self-confidence and a comfort level with improv that you don't get if you don't start from day one. So if you're bringing it in the middle, comfort is even more important. Cool. And then one of the things that he said that I thought was really neat was, what kind of creative kids would we get if from day one they were making it up for themselves? What would we get in this kind of open, collaborative environment? And it's true. My students, I get to see this. From the very beginning of their their time with me, we're creating stuff, and I have some really creative, super cool kids. The next idea he talked about was legitimizing improv, that right now improv is really just for professional jazz musicians, and the further away you get from being the little kid who can get away with anything, the less willing you are to break open and do something different. And so, when you're doing improv, I think what makes it scary is you have to make choices. You don't just follow dots on a page. And without that element of being able to make musical decisions, you can be an incomplete musician. You need to have that ability to make those decisions. And that's what we're trying to do for these kids. One of the other things he said, we're worshiping at the altar of great composers. And we kind of still are. And so we have to get away from that a little bit and be willing to try something new, be open to trying something. So the next idea, and before we go to the next slide, I'll preface it a little bit. One of the things that Dr. Hurst does is sound painting, and it's started by this guy named Elton Thompson, and actually when we were chatting, we found a YouTube video of him doing this with his orchestra. And what you should watch, I only have a minute of it, and it's a really bad visual, but pull out what you can from watching it. Look for his hands, because it's a sign language. It's a way to, I want you to stop and repeat the same note. Okay, you're done. And that's in there, and you'll kind of see it. So this is an example of that. While we talk. Cool. So stop there because you can't watch the whole 12-minute video. But the next part, there's actually actors, and they go and they're following the hand signs as well, but they're doing it with their voices and text. So I'd encourage go look up some of the videos online. They're kind of crazy cool. So before we go to the next slide, there's a video that'll start right away of actually my kids before the last recital, we did group lessons where they ran through their stuff like a rehearsal, and then we had the opportunity to do improv and do some kind of fun activities. So I'll let the video speak for itself, but here's a bunch of private piano kids improvising at my house.
You're starting.
And afterward, we talked about, well, why did you do what you did? How did you do it? You know, what gave you that idea? Who were you listening to? What could you do differently? And we did it a few different times. On this slide, I talked, these are some of the things I do in the studio. One of the things I do is the one-on-one improv, where I'll sit down and I'll play like a simple chord progression and say, okay, play any white key, go. Or I'll do it on black keys, play any black key, go. And the further we get into their instruction, when they know keys or we're working in hand positions, I'll also do it with that as well. This was an example of using group lessons as a teacher, also using free improv. Like, cool, 2 minutes, play something in that hand position, play something on all white keys, you know, play something in this range, anything like that. And also using it as part of repertoire, very, very similar to what we do in band class. You can do it with kids' music, you know, they have these 4-bar little pieces, and it's like, well, why can't they do the A section, right? A B section, we'll go back to A. Ooh, you learned form and you wrote something. Cool. Next slide. This is actually on a handout that you guys grabbed on the way in. This is what I was able to find on available materials for teaching. Most of them are in the private studio. Alfred puts out a lot of them. The coolest one that I really want to learn a little bit more about, I couldn't find a lot of information currently because it came out in March of this year, is the one at the bottom by Barbara Friedman. It's supposed to be basically out of the box, you're a band teacher, here teach using improv and composition. So that's something that could have a lot of potential, but yeah, there's not a lot on it just yet. Cool. Cool. This is applying some lesson plans. One of my students, Miss Tara, is going to play for us, but this is a little bit about her background. She's been with me for about 2 years. She's almost done with her Alfred Premier Piano Course Book 1A. Her strengths: strong sight reader, she knows her staff, treble clef, bass or grand staff, time signatures, all that stuff. She's able to play solo melodies with each hand, can play right hand melody with a really basic left hand harmony. And then opportunities for growth. Sometimes she needs a little help focusing, but that's okay. You're 7, so it's okay. We're working on it. And then and right now, recently, she's had trouble keeping eyes on the page. She's such a good musician, she memorizes it and then buries her head in her hands. So this is how we actually did. This is how we did her composition. So the first thing I had her do was write down the note names. Have her play something, write down the note names. Left, right hand, left hand. Next step, let's put it on staff. So I had her do it, and I had her do it with half notes, so we could actually dictate the rhythm later. Then step 3 was to decipher the rhythm. So I put on a metronome, I played it the way she played it, and I said, okay, put arrows over the notes that you held longer than the others. And then as I played it with the metronome a couple more times, she was actually able to figure out, wait, those are quarter notes, but I think that's a half note. So the basis of, dictation is there at age 7, which is awesome. And then finally, we added the left hand. She just did G's. So it was easy to just duplicate the rhythm and duplicate the notes. Cool. So I'm going to have her actually play right now. Mrs. Harden, you're up. Please play. You're playing your song that you wrote for me. I brought a copy of it. I was ready. This is the completed piece. You can read a little bit of that. Right? That you probably noticed this was the first part she played. In the extension, we did the beat section, and then I had her pick before, and she chose a song. So the next one is her little Baroja, who's going to play as well. His was a little shorter. Hers took a whole lesson. It was a whole 30 minutes, so I had her actually write out her stuff by herself, so it took a little while. But his was only 15 minutes. He's been with me for about a year or so. He's actually started with a little snare drum kind of before that. And then he's about a quarter way through his book. And then, I lost my place. There's my place. Some of his strengths, he's got great energy, full of energy. He's improving in his focus. He enjoys playing. We actually did that one-on-one improv in his last lesson and had way too much fun. His opportunities for growth. He's still a little weak on like note values, like half note, quarter note type stuff, which is what they are. I'm still unsure of piano key names. Sometimes we mess up, say B is C or something like that. And then hit or miss on the musical alphabet. We haven't run through it recently, so we should probably do it again here soon. Then here's how we did his piece, because he actually hasn't gotten to the staff yet. The book hasn't introduced it yet. So he picked his piece on black keys, because that's what he's played so far. And I'm sitting there realizing I have no way to notate this that he'll understand. So this is what I came up with. We drew out a keyboard. I said, okay, what keys did you play? Because he played within 4 octaves or so. And I put in the red, it's kind of hard to read it. The red are the notes in the order that he played them. So 1, 2, 3, 4, he played them all at once. Then 5, 6, 7, 8. And then on the bottom are the finger numbers he used. And he was able to tell me what finger numbers he used. Then the rhythm that he played. And he actually did play those notes staccato. I don't know if he'll do it today, but at the time he did. So we got to discuss what's staccato, playing long, short notes, that sort of thing. Yeah, and there's that. He named it Batman. It's pretty cool. And we were able to go on and add some other parts. I actually have them with me afterward if you guys want to take a look. But Mr. Nehemiah is going to come up and play this. Need you read it? You heard a little bit of his beat section as well, which is awesome. Cool. So before we do the next slide, this is Tell a Story Without Words, which is an activity that I've done with my kids for a while at camp and those sort of things. We did it in a group lesson. It starts right into their story, so try to pick up on kind of what they might be trying to convey. Oh, just kidding. This is the summary and extension for his lesson. What's your guess?
Okay, so my guess is
I'll just say for it.
when I want to see how the song is happy, is a monster something, and then I want to see something bad, like I want to see that when she starts playing, what's her name? When Brandy. When Brandy starts playing bass, I'll do this level. What's right, and then at the very end, all the people are dead, and the jamborees are like, and the jamborees are these things, all the people who are dead and then we call them.
Okay, anyone else have a guess? What was your guess, Ben, from before? Explain it again for me.
So it's where it's all raining outside, and the symbols are like the rain pattering, and then Brandy's playing like most of your outside, and sad. But then she starts playing, yeah. It's like rainbow, rain stop, but you wrap it, rain, really.
Cool. Do you have a guess, Miss Jessica? Nope. All right. What was it actually, my friends?
It was people saying like when they're like a baby or a kid, they're a story.
Cool. So what did the shaker represent?
The baby.
Cool. What did the drum represent? Okay. What did your piano part represent? Okay. And then what did Jillian's last piano part represent? Cool. Life's good. Do you guys see it now? Yay! Open to interpretation. Yay.
So that's an activity I do. Basically, it's like improv structured by a story. And in case the first girl you didn't understand what her guess was, she said that the drum was a monster stomping, that the fast playing was people scrambling for their lives, and at the end were the people dead and rain falling on them. So a little dark for it being like a life story, but that was her guess. So it was cool. I thought it was interesting that both the little girl and Ben had rain in there as their guesses. I thought that was kind of interesting. So real quick, before we go on to the next thing, are there any questions anyone would like to ask or a comment that anyone would like to share? Okay, well then guess what? We'll go on to the next thing. All right. It's your turn to tell a story without words. So I'd love for you to group up with people close to you in groups of